Good afternoon. This is going to be fun. Holding a microphone and trying to read from my iPad. It could all go horribly wrong, and possibly will, with it being me. But first of all, thank you for including me in this conference and in this discussion, and for inviting me. It's a real privilege to be here. For those of you who know me, I can talk about community interest companies all day, so I'm really happy to be standing here discussing my favorite topic. I have to admit that when I first heard about this conference, I hadn't realized what a high profile it had, and that it operated at such a high level. And I do feel very humble in the presence of all of you experts. I'm very proud to be here to fly the British flag in terms of a model that was developed in the UK to address some issues around social enterprise. And I do feel that we've blazed the trail with this piece of work. And I hope that you will find that the model is something that you can look at as a template, potentially, for setting up and running social enterprise. I only have 15 minutes. I'm going to try and be very good and stick to the 15 minutes, but it's very easy to run on. But I will do my best because I'm first up, and if I overrun, everybody overruns. So I'll try and be very careful. You'll see in the big blue book that's been distributed that I didn't write a paper to go in there, and nor do I have any PowerPoint. And that's partly because when I'm speaking, I like to get a feel for the conference and the flavour of the conference, and really to develop my talk around that, which is what I've been doing. Partly because I'm not really an academic, and I'm not very good at writing papers, and my PowerPoint slides probably wouldn't be very relevant even if I were to use them. But mainly because if I write something, I'm bound to end up saying something completely different, and it won't make any sense to anybody. So that's my excuse anyway. I also sort of feel I'm here under false pretenses because I am now working as an independent consultant for social enterprise and talking about CICs, and I have a lot of knowledge about CICs, but I'm here, I think, because in my previous role, I was the regulator of community interest companies. And I did that for quite a long time, but the appointment was completed in September 2015. So I'm not standing here as the regulator of community interest companies, but I am standing here as somebody who knows a lot about them and how they've evolved. It was really nice to see earlier in somebody's slide that regulators were portrayed as friendly dolphins. I liked to think as the regulator of CICs that I was a bit like a friendly dolphin. I tried to make regulation something that people weren't afraid of and that was approachable, so people didn't feel that they couldn't speak to the regulator and to the regulator's office. There's a certain amount of fear around that title and that name, and it's not what it's really about in this particular role. The regulator of community interest companies post is a statutory appointment. So it's the regulator is appointed by the Secretary of State for Business, the Department of Business, Innovation and Skills. And the appointment is normally for 3 years in the first instance, and then it can be extended to 5 years if they like you. I have to say that I did it for 8 years. So either they really liked me or they just couldn't be bothered to find anybody else at the time and they just let me stay. I hope they really liked me. But I did reach my statute of limitations at that point, which meant I couldn't be reappointed. So there is now a new regulator whose name is Kerry Witchard, and she's been there for just over a month. And that's partly the other reason I'm here, because I have 8 years of experience of regulating community interest companies, and she's only just picking it up. And I think that would have been quite difficult. The regulator is a statutory independent office holder. And the reason that that post is an independent office holder is because some government bodies will become and will set up community interest companies. And the CIC regulator's role is to make decisions about community interest companies, whether they should become community interest companies, if there's a problem, how that should be dealt with, and ultimately has the power to wind up community interest companies. So that person, while being paid by as a civil servant, is operating independently from the government. It's quite an interesting role and quite difficult to get to understand. But the regulator of community interest companies has significant powers as a regulator. Powers that mean that she can investigate, she can require audit of accounts and of the company. She can appoint and remove directors should there be a problem, and as a result of investigation. She can hold property, and that includes freezing bank accounts, much in the same way as in the UK the Charity Commission can do. And as I mentioned, can wind up a company if it is proved that there has been some kind of misconduct or mismanagement, or in particular bringing the brand into disrepute. So the regulator has quite a tough role, but it is light touch regulation, which means that there aren't inspection visits, that the regulator isn't going to be turning up on the doorstep of a company and asking them to explain what they're doing. There isn't that kind of monitoring, but there is an ongoing process of monitoring. But it is very much at arm's length. But those powers are there should there be a problem. So really, okay, you want to know what a CIC is. Well, we're talking about certification this afternoon, but CICs aren't certified, they are regulated. They are registered and regulated. It's a social innovation, came into being just over 10 years ago now, but it's designed to meet need, it's designed to meet social purpose, it's for delivering social value, and it's for delivering social impact. CICs are essentially regulated social enterprise. They're registered in the UK as limited companies, ordinary limited companies like any other limited company, and they're registered through Companies House, and they get a company number like any other company. The difference is that while they are limited companies, they will have the CIC designation or community interest company designation at the end of their name instead of limited. So instead of being Sara B Limited, they would be Sara B CIC or Sara B Community Interest Company. Nevertheless, they are the same as any other limited company and responsible under company law, the Companies Act 2006. And directors are required to behave as any other company would be expected. But there are some other things that apply to the CIC that make it different. It registers as a CIC and as a company at the same time, and the team for CICs is based at Companies House in Wales in the UK, so everything is in the same place. CICs are registered under the interpreters all love this, Companies Audit, Investigation and Community Enterprise Act 2004. CAICE. So it's embedded in a piece of legislation. It's a very small piece of legislation. It's not extensive. It's designed to be very simple, and the companies are designed to be very simple. The regulations themselves were laid down in 2005, so the regulations come out of the basic legislation. I must remember to keep this a bit nearer my face so that you can hear what I'm saying. So legislation, the regulations, the office of the regulator was set up in 2005, and so in the past year we've been celebrating 10 years of the community interest company model. Nobody knew when it was set up what was going to happen, how it was going to be evolve, whether it was going to be really popular and successful, or whether it was just not really going to be taken up. Obviously, there'd been a lot of consultation and debate, and there was a feeling and a view that this was a good thing to do. But nobody knew. But if I tell you that when I first became regulator in 2007, there were less than 1,000 community interest companies. And when I finished my appointment back in September 2015, there were more than 11,500 community interest companies. That was significant growth. And I think it was more than expected. I think at the beginning we were expected to register something between 200 and 400 companies a year. By now, they're registering 250 companies a month, which is a significant indication of the interest in the model and the success of the model. Community interest companies have some special features, and those special features are what make it different and what make it accountable and transparent. And we were talking about transparency over lunch, and one of the important things about the CIC is that it is transparent. The first important thing is that it has a statutory asset lock, which means that by law it must lock its assets and its profits into the purpose of the company. That means it must use its profits and its assets for the purpose of the company. The purpose of the company is its identified community interest, and that could be pretty much anything. It could be a local neighborhood initiative, it could be regional, it could be a group of disabled people, it could be renewable energy, it could be all sorts of things. There's a whole range of different kinds of operations that take place within the community interest company family and movement. But all of them must lock their assets in, and while there are different models and different types of company that are CICs, it's a very flexible model, and I haven't got time to go into the detail, but there are share companies that can be community interest companies, which means they can sell shares in their company and they can pay dividends, and investors can get a return on that. And we changed the legislation back in 2014 because the regulations around those share companies were actually too restrictive and were preventing investment. So we removed what was then a cap on dividends, share dividends, and by removing the cap, we moved a peg to the paid up value of the share. So originally you could only get dividends on the paid up value of the share. Now that's changed and the paid up value is no longer applicable. So it's an evolving model, it's developing, it's growing, and the legislation was left flexible enough that we could make changes if we needed to. And we've made some significant changes. So statutory asset lock applies to all community interest companies, whether they're a company limited by shares, by guarantee. They can be a public limited company, a listed company, and they can be a cooperative community interest company, which is a bit of a contradiction in terms because cooperatives are membership companies and CICs are not. But there is an option in that model. CICs must report on an annual basis, and that's why there is transparency in their operation. Their registration documents are all put on record. They're checked by the team, the Office of the Regulator, who make sure they meet the criteria on registration, and then they must report on an annual basis on how they are meeting their objectives and their activities, and how they're consulting with their stakeholders, and how they're delivering their social purpose and their community benefit. And the regulator, in fact, when I was the regulator, every annual report was read. And if you consider we had nearly 7,000 reports in last year, every annual report was looked at, and then a random sample was looked at in detail. So, and those documents go on public record. So anybody can read them. They're on the Companies House website. Anybody can look at them and challenge what those companies have said about what they're doing. And one of the important things about being regulated is that there is a body that anybody can complain to if they have concerns about a CIC. They are very accountable. They are accountable to their community. They are accountable to the wider public. They're accountable to the regulator. So the Office of the Regulator registers and monitors, it provides information, it deals with complaints, and it's also there to raise awareness about CICs. As I said, they can do anything that any other company is allowed to do within company law. Of course, they're not allowed to do anything illegal, and that would be dealt with should it happen. There are some quite serious complaints that go into the regulator's office, and every complaint is dealt with very carefully. The CIC team are civil servants. They are paid by the Department for Business and they are employed by the Department for Business. They are civil servants. They work to the regulator but not for the regulator. The office receives grant and aid from the government in order to operate. So that's very small, and increasingly over the 8 years that I was there, got smaller every year, not bigger. However, there is an income that comes from charges for registering, fees for registering a company and for submitting an annual return. And obviously that's increasing, particularly the money for the annual return year on year, so that ultimately in the long run, the CIC office will be self-sustaining itself, which is appropriate seeing as it's dealing with social enterprise. Social enterprise in the UK isn't new. Somebody said earlier it's been going for hundreds of years. That's true, starting with the cooperative movement, but probably going back even beyond that. But it really has come to the fore in the last 20 to 30 years, and there's been the start, or there has been a debate over definition of social enterprise. That's ongoing, and again, we were talking over lunch about how you really define social enterprise and what is the definition, and there are lots of variations. One of the reasons the CIC was brought into being was because there was a need to have a model that could be identified very particularly as delivering social purpose. It very specifically has to do particular things. It must have those statutory clauses in its articles of association. Those can't be changed. Unlike an ordinary company, there are some clauses that can't be changed, and so once a CIC, always a CIC unless it winds up. And so it was giving some structure and some identification to what a social enterprise could be. It's not for everybody. There are lots of models in the UK that operate as social enterprise, so it's not the only choice for social entrepreneurs. That probably makes it more difficult for them in deciding where to go, but it depends what they want to do with their business and how they want to run it. The CICs have been recognised in social enterprise in general as making a significant contribution to the economy. You saw Tristan's statistics earlier. CIC, interestingly at the moment, is kind of a microcosm for social enterprise in the UK, and actually it's still quite valuable for research purposes, and a number of pieces of research are being done using CICs to look at innovation and to look at where they're located. But actually the results that come from that can be applied more widely across social enterprise. So the CIC is a legal structure. It's the first new company model in the UK for 100 years. It's a legal organisation, and it is responsible as such in law for what it does. It's an accountable model. CICs don't get any tax exemptions. They operate like any other company. In the UK, they pay corporation tax, they pay value-added tax, and they pay any other taxes that they have to pay as a company. There are no exemptions. There's no help. I have to say that last year when we changed the dividend cap, that freed them up a bit more for investment and removed some barriers, and at the same time, social investment tax relief, which again Tristan was talking about earlier, was brought in, and that's a 30% relief to small investors who invest in specifically community interest companies, charities, or benefit societies. It doesn't cover all social enterprise. It only covers those particular models, so it's very specific. So there's no tax exemptions, they have to behave like an ordinary company, and they take on extra regulations. So why do they bother? Why do 11,500 CICs do what they do? Well, first of all, those that do, and again going back to a talk yesterday, those that do are less open to being able to abuse the definition of social enterprise. They can't say they are a CIC unless they are a CIC, and I know that the Regulator's Office has chased a number of companies for calling themselves CICs that are not CICs. So they can't be something they're not. I mean, nothing's perfect. We're never going to be 100% perfect here, and it's a learning process, but that's the principle. I think there's competitive advantage in the regulation because they can be trusted. Those investing in them, those giving grant funding, those putting their money into buying shares, know where the money is going and how it's going to be used. There's that transparency there, there's the reporting transparency, and the regulator has oversight of that company. So there's some competitive advantage there. It's a brand, and that's why most people take it on. It's a brand. We're a CIC. When I first started as the regulator, nobody knew what that was. Today, well, I know there are at least 4 people in this room who know what CICs are, and maybe more, and that's here in China. So it is much better known, and it is becoming increasingly better known. So it's transparent. It also has strong governance in comparison to a UK charity. In charities in the UK, the governance is usually very large boards of people who can't always make decisions because there's too many. So you only need one director to set up a CIC. That's not enough because this is social enterprise and it's complex. And also, of course, there's the regulator and the regulating body. There are issues and challenges for CICs. The numbers are increasing. There are some issues around investment readiness because many are quite small, although I have to say in the last 2 or 3 years, public sector has moved into the CIC area, and so a lot of health organisations, primary care trusts are now community interest companies. 90% of the health spin-outs that became social enterprises a couple of years ago were CICs. And so it's changing, but there are issues and challenges. They're more complex, and they're more reliant on contracts and trading than perhaps they were at the beginning. And there are other options, so there's a lot to think about. But I do hope it's a template for around the world. It's great talking to you here in China, and people have come and spoken to me in the UK. I know Korea have come and spoken to us. We've talked to people from Japan, South Africa, Bangladesh. And if you look at Canada, there are 3 provinces in Canada that run CIC-type models. So I hope that's enough to give you a flavour of the CIC model and where it sits within social innovation and social impact. It's a really quick run through, and there's an awful lot that I haven't been able to tell you, and I did say I could talk all day about it, but I've had my 15 minutes of fame, so I think I should shut up. I'd like to say I do appreciate that so many people speak and understand English. I was really worried coming here that I wasn't going to be able to understand and make myself understood, and it's great that I have been able to do that. There really wasn't time to do a crash course in Mandarin before I came, and I did buy a phrase book, but actually I threw it away because it was going to cause more problems than it was going to solve. However, I have just about grasped how to say thank you. 谢谢.